Our economy is stronger than the American economy in the medium term. And we are going to be stronger than the American economy.
Really craving demand or stockpiling. Having said that, Canadian demand, wheat exports have been really strong in Canada.
Well, it all comes to Donald Trump, right? He needs an excuse to be and that's what he's doing.
Japan turned away. France quietly followed. And then, Mexico, America's closest trade partner, signed a historic new deal with Canada. While Washington focused on tariffs as a tool of pressure, the rest of the world began to quietly walk in a different direction. And Canada, reliable, steady, and unprovocative, was right there to catch what America let slip through its fingers. In just 6 weeks, the United States lost something it had spent generations building its position as the global leader in agriculture. Not because of war, not because of climate disaster, but because of a trade strategy that was supposed to restore control and instead triggered a silent collapse. More than $9 billion worth of agricultural contracts disappeared almost overnight. Not because buyers rejected America, but because they no longer felt they could count on it. There were no public announcements, no angry headlines, just a quiet shift. Contracts were signed, ships were rerouted, and goods once grown in the American heartland were now being sourced from the plains of Alberta and Saskatchewan. And the world kept moving, just not with the United States. So now we have to ask, has America simply lost a few deals, or has it lost the world's trust for good? By the second quarter of 2025, the signs were impossible to ignore. U.S. agricultural exports had dropped by $6 billion, while Canada's surged by 13%. This wasn't the result of war or weather, but a gradual shift driven by buyer fatigue, delivery concerns, and the erosion of trust in America's trade reliability. Beneath the surface, a deeper imbalance emerged. In just the first 4 months of the year, the U.S. imported $78.2 billion in agricultural goods, but exported only $58.5 billion, a nearly $20 billion shortfall. Analysts now forecast a 3.3% further decline in exports by year's end, pushing total shipments down to $170 billion and possibly widening the trade deficit to a record $45.5 billion, a level unseen in more than a decade. But the fallout goes far beyond the numbers. In rural hubs, trucks sit idle, and warehouses collect dust as contracts are quietly canceled or allowed to lapse. Banks are tightening credit. Insurers are raising premiums or withdrawing coverage altogether. Many farmers now face a planting season without the capital or confidence to continue. And for the small and mid-sized producers from Iowa to California, the pain is personal. Most didn't overproduce or miscalculate, yet they're paying the price for a market that stopped listening, and for international buyers who now see the U.S. as unreliable. Because when trust evaporates, not just in pricing, but in delivery stability and policy, the damage becomes irreversible. No subsidy, no bailout, no PR campaign can repair a reputation once the world moves on. What happened to American agriculture wasn't sabotage, it was substitution. While the U.S. was busy navigating trade disputes and tariff battles, international buyers simply found a more reliable partner. And in just 2 months, Canada's agricultural exports surged 37%. Back in the U.S., production didn't stop, but demand did. Corn, soybeans, and beef are sitting in storage unsold and increasingly devalued. According to the USDA's latest grain stocks report, corn inventories remain stuck at 4.50 billion bushels, while soybean stockpiles have climbed 4% year over year, now at 1.91 billion bushels. Total surplus over 52 million metric tons, the highest since 2013. In Iowa, corn prices have fallen to their lowest level in a decade, leaving many farmers unable to cover basic costs. As buyers pull back, warehouses fill up, and processors scale down, the market is sending a clear signal: it's producing too much for a world that no longer waits. At the same time, banks are tightening credit, especially for small and mid-sized farms already under pressure. Without new contracts or financing, many of these producers now face a dangerous equation: mounting costs, declining prices, and no guarantee anyone will buy next season's crop. This is not a dramatic collapse. It's a slow bleed, and it's happening in silence. Across the heartland, from the windswept plains of Kansas to the sun-drenched valleys of California, American farmers are being pulled into a crisis they did not create but are now forced to endure. On one end, inventories are overflowing with unsold crops, corn, soybeans, and meat products sitting idle in silos, warehouses, and cold storage with no buyer in sight. On the other, the cost of simply staying operational is climbing fast. Fuel prices have spiked, fertilizer remains volatile, and insurance premiums continue to rise, adding strain to already razor-thin margins. Farmers are trapped in a brutal equation. They can't afford to keep producing, but they can't afford to stop either. The land doesn't wait. Machinery still breaks. Banknotes still come due. And every day they plant another acre without a guaranteed buyer, the financial risk deepens. What makes this even harder to accept is the contrast just across the northern border. Canadian farms facing the same global conditions are not shrinking, they're expanding. With new international contracts, access to low-interest financing, and growing buyer confidence, they're not just surviving, they're securing long-term market share. While American farmers wait on emergency relief packages that rarely arrive on time, if at all, their Canadian counterparts are negotiating multi-year deals backed by predictable policy and stable delivery. In this environment, patriotism and resilience are no longer enough. Farmers aren't asking for handouts. They're asking for market access, reliable trade partners, and a government that acts faster than the collapse it's trying to prevent. At this point, the challenge is no longer about how much America can grow. The real question is, who's left to buy, and how many more seasons can farmers hold on while waiting for an answer? When beef arrives in Tokyo, it is not from Texas. It is from Alberta. The shift didn't happen overnight, but when it came, it was decisive. Longtime U.S. trading partners, once seen as dependable clients for American agriculture, have begun rewriting their supply maps, this time without the United States at the center. Japan, historically one of the largest buyers of American soybeans and wheat, has quietly moved its entire portfolio of contracts to Canada. France and Germany have signed new multi-year deals covering dairy and grains that will run through the end of 2026. And in the United Kingdom, nearly 40% of existing soybean contracts have been reassigned to producers in Saskatchewan. These are not symbolic moves, they are structural. This is no longer about politics, tariffs, or headline diplomacy. This is about food, what people eat, how regularly they get it, and how much trust they place in the supply chains behind it. For buyers across Europe and Asia, the question is no longer who offers the cheapest price, but who delivers on time without disruption. And right now, the answer increasingly quietly and consistently is Canada. In 2024, the United States exported more than $30 billion in food to Mexico, its largest agricultural customer and closest trade partner. For decades, the relationship seemed unshakable, built on geography, shared infrastructure, and years of cross-border supply chain integration. But then Washington changed the tone. Border closures intensified, immigration checks became tighter, and critical freight corridors began to slow under mounting bureaucratic pressure. What started as a political gesture quickly turned into a logistical choke point. Mexico didn't issue warnings. It didn't hold press conferences. Instead, it responded with silence and with action. In April 2025, a Canadian trade delegation arrived in Mexico City. By June, the two countries had signed a $5 billion agricultural agreement covering grain, dairy, and processed goods. The impact was immediate. Agricultural exports to Mexico dropped 18% within months, a blow from which many suppliers have yet to recover. Meanwhile, Canada's exports to Mexico jumped 16%, marking their largest year-over-year surge in over a decade. This wasn't just a shift in trade, it was a shift in trust. And when even your closest ally starts making other plans, it's no longer a temporary setback, it's a strategic realignment. For years, the U.S. relied not just on production power, but on deep trade relationships, especially with its G7 allies. But at the June 2025 G7 summit, that foundation quietly fractured. The U.S. president left early, negotiations fell apart, and the alliance that once anchored American exports began to slip. Soon after, Canada held private meetings with the remaining five: Japan, the UK, France, Germany, and Italy. No public statements, no drama, just quiet agreements. And for the first time, the contracts that used to bear the signature USA now read Canada. It wasn't just a diplomatic failure, it was the moment the global farm order started to shift permanently. They are not rejecting the United States, they are reducing risk. Tariffs were meant to be leverage, a way to pressure allies into bending under economic weight. But instead of yielding, they pushed back. Canada responded with electricity tariffs. Mexico tightened border controls, disrupting freight and fresh produce. The G7 abandoned talks, and quietly the world began making new plans without the U.S. at the center. This wasn't a protest, it was a precaution, Buyers and governments alike started treating the U.S. not as unreliable, but as risky. And in agriculture, where consistency matters more than muscle, that perception was enough to drive business elsewhere. What was once sold as a strategy to regain control has now become a slow economic undoing, not for those who wrote the policy, but for the farmers now left without markets, without credit, and without a clear future. When Halifax replaces New Orleans and Alberta replaces Texas, the shift is no longer theoretical. It's logistical, it's commercial, and it's already underway. Canada isn't offering the lowest prices. It's offering something more valuable: stability. No last-minute policy reversals, no stalled ports, no tariff surprises. And in today's fragile supply chains, that's what buyers are choosing, even over a superpower. If this trend doesn't reverse soon, the problem won't just be poor harvests. It will be lost land, lost buyers, and a lost future for American agriculture. So the real question now is not how much more the U.S. can grow, but whether anyone still wants to buy. What do you think it will take for America to earn back the world's trust? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're listening.